Good day, everybody. Happy to have you here on another episode. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Today, let me go along these lines. When I do interviews with people, I usually go over the work that we had done together at least a couple of times to be able to go and understand the flow, be able to cut up some of the stuff for the intro, things of that nature. With this interview that I'm going to have for you today with Glen Gunderson, the head of the YMCA of the North here in Minnesota, I actually had to step away and take some time to just process all of the great things that Glen is doing over there at the Y, not only before the pandemic, but afterwards. In this interview, you're going to hear some things about how Glen has really transformed the Y from a place that I thought was at the core in terms of being able to provide experiences for the community, but having the health club, that center, be somewhat distinct from the mission side, to that location being the hub, a community center to be able to go and deliver programming and support community aims in a manner that supports that community. And the amount of alignment that's required of the entire leadership team on down to the full-time and part-time individuals such like me when my two sons were young and we were taking them to day camp and I was coaching them in basketball. The work that Glen is doing now to be able to go and have the Y support their communities, I had to take a break away from listening to things because I was just amazed at hearing Glen go over a lot of the things that they're doing and a lot of the things that they've been working through to be able to get to this point, pre and post COVID. It's an honor to know Glen, to have played basketball with him back in the day, and still consider him a friend. There's a lot to go and digest in this episode. Take the time, really take some opportunities to go and see how, even though the Y is a not-for-profit entity, how the work that they're doing, not only in aligning their organization to serve their mission, but how they're trying to drive greater diversity, inclusion, and equity, not only within the Y, but in the communities they serve. It's a marvelous conversation, and I hope you really enjoy it. So I've talked long enough. I've hyped this long enough. Let's get to that interview with Glen Gunderson. Cheers. Glen Gunderson, thank you so much for joining us on the Misadventures and Organizational Misalignment podcast. It's been a few years since we've seen each other. It's so great to be able to go and see your face. Thanks for joining.
Oh, you got it, Eric. It's great to be with you. And I think we go back about 30 years, having played basketball, meeting up in camps way back in the day.
You know, when you say 30 years, it kind of gives me this sick feeling in my stomach that it's actually been 30 years. I remember our time as teammates in the Bethel Summer Basketball League with you up in St. Francis, me at Irondale, and bringing it together. And I remember one of our teammates was a kid from Forest Lake, and our first game together, he goes and talks to us like, you know, you ended up breaking my nose during that game we played in the spring. I'm like, what? Yeah, I thought I hit you in the chest, because he was like climbing all over my back and I gave him a little bit of a bow and he was low and I crushed his nose. I felt so horrible. But we had Jess Elmquist on that squad too, who's over at Lifetime.
Childhood friend of mine, exactly, and a guy who's over at Lifetime Fitness, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, that was 84.
All
So
right, so I was rounding down on the 30 years.
rounding down, but now you don't seem to have, well, you maybe you got a little bit of gray there on the sides, but I've got a heck of a lot more going on there. We're a lot more seasoned. Do you still try and get a little basketball in?
Only through my kids. I haven't played much in a number of years. I coached in youth basketball for years, and now they're both in high school, my daughter and my son, so I get a chance to watch their games. Still love the game. Anytime I can tune into a Big Ten game, wish I was watching live and in person at Williams Arena this winter, but love the game and continue to stay tuned in.
One of those seminal things with my two boys was when I couldn't beat them anymore. We would go one on one, and that first time that my older son he was skunking me. It was like 9-0 going to 11, and he started letting up. And I'm like, no, you got to go for my throat, man. You got to go for the kill. That's what you need to do. And just to go and get it. I ended up beating them again afterwards, but that seminal moment of when you're not good enough to go and beat your kids, part of it's
Yeah.
they're getting better, you're getting slower.
I've experienced it. I think it was probably seventh or eighth grade, unfortunately, when my son started taking me down. And I do remember a few shutouts as well, where it was make it, take it, and he got on a roll from deep and made a laughing stock out of me.
I know that those are truly humbling as a parent, to be able to go that. So we have both great experience in basketball, and this has led you through your time with Lifetime Fitness and now as the president of the YMCA of the North here in Minnesota. So that health and wellness through physical activity has been a major component, it seems, of the way that you've lived your adult life. So congratulations, and you look marvelous.
Well, thanks. Good thing it's not a video cast here, huh? It is interesting. I thought maybe I would get engaged early in my life. I would get involved in sports medicine in some way. I thought maybe I'd take a year off and go back to graduate school down that lane, and really fell in love with helping people be healthy, and had a chance to do that with each of the organizations I've worked for. And the Y has been a very special place. The confluence of some complex business elements to manage, but then the mission of the Y, which is having such an amazing impact on young people, on families, on our seniors. I had never imagined the strength of the social mission of the YMCA until I had a chance to interview for this role and get engaged, and that's been a blessing to serve in this context.
I remember you actually sent me an email when you were interviewing for the role, and you couched it that you were looking at being a board member.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then all of a sudden I kind of find out that you're president CEO. I'm like, okay, there's a little bit more to that. But my boys were going through the process of being at the Y as young kids, going through the little basketball program that I coached, and swimming, and then the day camps in the summer,
Yeah.
and all the things that it was doing for youth in the community,
Hmm.
which I thought was absolutely great. And then we had conversations about the aspect of families leaving in their teen years, and
Yeah.
looking at that strategically. So, being with the Y and being connected with that, I think it's great for you. Obviously, you're one of the kinder individuals that I know, and to have someone with that type of character running this type of organization is marvelous. But you kind of mentioned the mission part of it, and that's
Mhm.
why we're here to really talk,
Mhm.
is how the Y of the North, the YMCA of the North, really specifically goes and helps its employees, the leadership, to be able to go and make certain that the mission of the organization is fulfilled in really kind of an interesting context with
Mhm.
a for-profit health club wellness side, and then the nonprofit program mission side.
Yeah.
Could you talk about, as the head of the organization, kind of the mission of the YMCA of the North, and how that goes and plays into the way you lead, and the way you go and develop people?
Yeah, no, of course. One clarification I'd make is, the entire organization is a charitable cause organization. It's a nonprofit, including the well-being elements that happen within our branches and our health centers. And the mission has been really zeroed into this notion of becoming a multicultural, anti-racist organization, focusing on equity, well-being, and access for our community, and then really diving into the development aspects, kind of the key development milestones for our youth, for our young people. And it's a really broad mission. And one of the things I would say is challenging about leading in a YMCA context is the breadth. It's not a typical brand where you're serving, a very finite, segment of the community, right? Every brand has its, 40-year-old female suburban target or something. Here we have this target of serving all, and the mission is very clearly articulated around moving all to a healthier place. And when you do that, it's difficult in some ways to choose, where investment's going to be placed. How are you going to develop programs when you're caring about seniors in all economic strata, all the way down to 0 to 3 programming for our youngest participants. So I would say from a leadership and organization management, that is a particular challenge that I think all of us as leaders within the Y face. But mission is an easy thing to get excited about, to be passionate about inside of the Y. We're literally moving the community forward, strengthening community in each and everything we do. It could span from helping young people who are being trafficked and get them out of a trafficking environment, or give them the preventative tools to ensure that they're not sucked up into the sex trade. It could be helping with homelessness, young people who are homeless or highly mobile, who literally are trying to find the next reasonably warm couch to hop, and tracking them down and making sure they're staying in school in this online or distance-based environment. All of a sudden has become a big part of our mission, coming
Right.
alongside schools and school leaders to ensure that work gets done. And then as you think about the pandemic's effect, the Y has really leapt into this community response hub idea, where we're serving food, we're reaching out to seniors so they don't become socially isolated, and we're working on kind of a laying eviction dynamics so young people can stay in the homes that they are in.
Wow, you went into, quite honestly, some really heavy stuff in terms of the things that you get into in terms of, the trafficking and homelessness. We might get into this a little bit later. It seems like your locations, and to help me out, YMCA of the North now encompasses all of Minnesota, or it's a multi-state area, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. So we did evolve from YMCA, the Greater Twin Cities, to YMCA, the North here about 6 months ago, made that announcement. And that was really fundamentally to encapsulate more fully the service area. There are a lot of independent Ys that operate autonomously within Minnesota. We stretch from Rochester up to the Gunflint Trail, up to the Canadian border, and then we stretch over to Hudson and northwestern Wisconsin. And our practically where we operate are through our centers. You'd think of the Rochester Y or the Shoreview Y as an example. Our camps, we have day camps. We operate 10-day camps, 8 overnight or resident camps. So you think about a family camp, Camp du Nord, or Camp Idahope in Loretto, Camp St. Croix in Hudson. And then childcare. So we operate in school age care, childcare, early learning programming across a little bit north of 100 sites. So the Y that I think our grandparents or our parents would think of in kind of a well-being, health and fitness, swim and gym concept has really evolved to be much more broad-based around community strengthening, and that. I think that's what has driven me to be so passionate about it and to stick around and continue to try to serve and support growth. But we have a regional footprint, and then we partner. We have a state alliance of YMCAs where we partner with independent Ys, as an example, in St. Cloud, Duluth, Mankato.
So it seems like the programming you have is centered, as you mentioned, around these hubs of whether it be clubs or the camps.
Mm-hmm.
And even you mentioned Shoreview, that's all part and parcel of a community center.
Exactly.
and you have that up in Forest Lake.
Mhm.
You've partnered with, in my area, White Bear Lake, in terms of the Y, and working with the school district and things of that nature. So yeah, it's been a lot different than when we were growing up, and it
Yeah.
was the club that you've
Yeah.
done a lot in terms of community.
Hmm.
So there's the health and wellness, and I was imagining you deliver programs there too. How does that work, that you have leadership be able to say, we're looking to go and build healthy spirit, mind, and body for all through that location in such a variety of
Yeah.
different avenues? It
Yeah.
must be tough to juggle.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I think coming back to, serving all age groups, all demographics, all income levels, all ethnicities, this is a pretty remarkable place in terms of equity and focusing in on the specific needs of each community and each segment within the community. Our leaders within our branches or our centers, they are remarkable because they cover a lot of ground, to your point. They're responsible for a physical plant. They're responsible for programs that are happening within, but they're also reaching out to civic leaders, to school leaders. Shoreview Y is a good example. It's engaging with the Mounds View School District, has for 30 years with school age care. So when a young person's dropped off at an elementary school in the district before school, or needs to be picked up well after the final school bell rings, that's a YMCA program. Same thing with the Egan schools, et cetera. So if you think about, it's almost like a mayor or a CEO of their community, where they're focused on developing relationships internally and externally. They also have a responsibility around philanthropy. So they're looking to drive and manage an annual fund each year to support scholarship activity, camperships, enabling young people who maybe wouldn't otherwise have a chance to participate in youth sports or go to camp or have swimming lessons or water safety classes for that matter. They're raising funds to ensure that those that need it most can get access. Now they're also in this, pandemic era. They're now having to be a food shelf, veritably. They're partnered with area food providers, and they now are a distribution hub. They're also making outreach to the seniors within their community that right now can't come in because of the risks of COVID, perhaps, or they don't have the mobility or the transportation to do so. So where we used to think about the Y serving when an individual would cross our threshold, then we could get them plugged into a program. Now we do some of that, but then we also do a lot of work out and into the community as well.
Right now my mind is blown, Glenn, in terms of the work that's done in such a proactive way. When we were going through the Y, when my children were younger, I didn't see any of that
Yeah,
in White Bear.
yeah.
Maybe it wasn't brought out as proactively,
Hmm.
saying this was about, and it was they loved the day camps. They loved being able to go and play basketball and being coached by their dad, who would hold
Yeah.
the net and to make sure that there are enough passes before a shot could be made. All these different things that were going on, and this was only 10 years ago,
Yeah,
12 years ago, to the extent that the people at each one of the locations are such more proactive in being able to be supporters of the community is absolutely marvelous. I would imagine, though, that this leads to a leadership challenge, and how you
yeah,
at the top of the organization work with your leadership team, and then on down through, to be able to help build the capacities, because those things that you're looking to have them do are quite broad in terms of
yeah,
needs for skill sets of
yeah.
strategic thinking, fundraising, business development, tactical operational execution with their teams.
Hmm.
I'm curious as to what type of development process or structure you have to be able to make certain that the tenets of the mission and vision are ingrained in those leaders, and then through them, the employees, and how you keep working with them to make sure that they keep the mission at the center, which is a lot easier at the Y than it would be for other organizations.
Yeah. Well, it's a really great insight, Eric. And I think it's the great challenge for leaders within the Y and somebody in my role. I used to joke that we do 1,000 things. We have 1,000 programs, and wouldn't it be nice if we could get to 883? And even that doesn't create kind of the alignment, the decision velocity, the best practice delivery that you'd want to see, right? So we are. And the other piece of this, which has been a hallmark of the Y for a century and a half, has been meeting the needs of the express or specific community. So the needs of White Bear are distinct from North Minneapolis, or distinct from Hastings, or distinct from Forest Lake. And how do you make sure that you at least have some authorship and ownership at the site-based level, that they can align with that civic leadership and that school district leadership to ensure that they're getting after the needs that are most important, without having such crazy variability that you can't execute efficiently,
Right.
you can't fund it. So we're actually at I would say, a bit of a crossroads on that effort right now, where we're focused on doing fewer things better, and not completely chopping off the ability to have that distinct, customized, support for a given community, but to really elevate those things that are delivering the best value, that are sustainable from a funding standpoint, that can be done over and over and over. Um, and try to shift so that where I would say 10 years ago, the variability was very high. Every facility was doing, maybe much more decentralized and more of its own thing. Now we're looking at, in an era where, especially with what's been put upon us with the pandemic, that we have got to be more efficient. We've got to be more mindful of sustainability of programs, and then ultimately, what is it that will deliver the ultimate results on behalf of communities. So, and to your point, that does come down to communication. It comes down to, ringing the same exact messaging and bell every single day, tightening down on what we want to be about, so that maybe the whole of, or the majority of our resources go at driving significant value and return. We think about our work on kind of a return on community value basis, not as much a return on investment, more what is the return to the community for the investments we're making. And we're getting a little better at measuring that, getting a little better at looking at what programs actually are not only able to deal with volume, but they're able to deal with significant outcomes, or kind of a delta of whether it be behavior change we're after, whether it be stabilizing housing for a given community, whether it be the number of young people we're giving the preventative tools to stay out of the trafficking realm. We're tightening that down, and it always ensuring that it is meeting with mission and vision.
At least, as I was listening to you, it got me thinking of two, and then as you mentioned homelessness, it got into three with kind of adults in various areas, especially with families. But with children and the elderly, especially with children, it's an aspect that you talked about, not getting them sucked up. But there's such an aspect that the Y can help build solid self-esteem
Yeah.
in them, to be able to open up their hearts to the possibilities of what positive Christian principled life, which is a core tenet of the Y, is really all about. In the ones that you mentioned, behavioral changes in there as one of the metrics that you're looking to get at. And to be able to go and not train leaders, but get leaders that connect with that mission, and be able to help the employees, the summer staff that comes at the day camp, to try and understand this is what we're really about. It's not just being a babysitter or help them play games, but you're actually looking to be able to go and touch each individual in your charge. How, let's get into that aspect with the kids. How does the organization really look to drive that down to the ones that are actually delivering the programming and having the direct impact?
Yeah, it's an outstanding question and perspective. And it's one of the bigger challenges in leading in a Y context. So we went into the pandemic with about 1,200 full-time team members and about 6,500 total. So if you think about that math, that is a lot of part-time team members that you don't have the luxury of being able to train as much, immerse them in some of the values orientation and the mission and vision work. And now coming through the pandemic, we've been cut almost in half in terms of our number of team members, at least in this, what I'd call a bit of a trough as we kind
Right.
of build out a glide path for this year and get back on track. So 750 folks full time and a total of maybe 3,200. So that's again, you're at the mercy in some ways of the frontline team member, and I would say we've been average so far at really immersing them in the mission vision. We do some new team member orientation. We've been engaged in more and more dialogue around our people and culture practices. And it is easy for, I think, folks to embrace what it is we're about. And certainly you come to the Y not to earn millions of dollars, but to actually have a big impact on the community. So, people are generally tuned in to why they're there. But the consistency is a challenge just over that number of people and over that dependency on part timers who, again, may have another full time job, may be going to school, probably have some other priorities that has the why subordinating to them. So that is a big piece. And so part of the way we do it is through communication. We are in a rhythm of communicating every week, trying to flatten communication, if you will, so that some of the messaging that comes from me or folks that I serve directly is getting to everyone at once. Still some barriers in terms of getting to some of our part-timers. So we do that on a weekly basis. We're engaged through our supervisors to reinforce mission and vision on a regular basis. We're trying to call out really the stories, the why stories that are resonant and emotive and kind of steal the reasons why you're there, like to see another family serve, to see a family get into a permanent housing situation and get their first job and to get on their feet. Those are really, powerful mission moments that I think our team benefits from. So we try to get those really spooling up and distributed out to the organization. I'm doing a conversation on race blog series right now that is talking about really talking to friends, mentors, leaders that I admire from around the country, mostly BIPOC leaders that are, I think, helping our team and helping me certainly understand some of our privilege, some of our systemic challenges, even in an organization like the Y that is about love and compassion and engaging the community. You still are large and complex enough to have all sorts of challenges relative to advancing equity in the way that we want to. So that's another place where I think the team is going to school, learning, and becoming a better steward of serving all, really advancing what we talk about as human dignity for all.
So you've mentioned COVID a few times here. Obviously, in terms of the health and wellness, the health club type of aspect, having clubs being shut down, now being at 25 or 50% capacity, that's had a big impact not only on the revenue, but as you mentioned, the number of employees that you happen to have.
Mhm.
If you could tell me the story of how you and the leadership team and everyone else, I suppose, from February, March, when
Yeah,
things really hit and saying, hey, we got to cloister off in our homes.
yeah.
And that had that bam, immediate impact on you guys. Tell us the listeners how you went through to be able to go and keep people connected, understand the different challenges that were coming up as a result of this, and how YMCA of the North was able to go and serve their communities.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have to give my wife some credit. It was probably late January where we were having a conversation late at night at home, and she said, "This is going to be a big deal." She said, "School's going to be shut down by the end of spring break," and I wasn't seeing it as something that was going to be anything more than a 2-week blip at that point, at the end of January.
Mm.
And then as February rolled in, by the end of February, we were meeting as a team pretty much daily. We had a morning meetings to try to prepare for what the various realities could be with this thing. We certainly didn't couldn't forecast what it was going to do, but we started to talk about it pretty intently. And then about 2 days before the governor's mandate in March, we did shut down. And I would say we pivoted and shifted our operations. So while we didn't close, we did have to close certain things. We couldn't operate our camps in the same way. Certainly, our overnight camps and keeping kids safe in cabins was going to go away for a while. Our ability to operate the centers was certainly mandated upon us 2 days after we had decided anyway. But we had started to see the potential for risk to our team members, and so we kind of erred on the side of safety. And then the governor helped us by making the decision anyway. And so a couple of things happened. One, we continued to meet every day. In fact, our leadership team, the group that I served directly, and I met every morning from March 16th until the end of October. We took the weekends off from those meetings, but we were on the phone a fair amount on Saturdays anyway, just trying to triage and to make sense of all of it. We prioritized safety right away and said our safety of our team members and our members is going to be foremost in everything that we do. So that was a kind of an edict that we all committed to. And then we shifted our thinking to say the Y is a community asset. It has been for all time. I mean, it's been here longer than we've been a state. So how do we think about making sure that we continue to deliver value? It had done so through every world war, and it had done so, right. It had been, in fact, in conflict. In the history of the United States, the Y was always stepping up. It developed some of the first mobile vehicles to bring food and supplies to troops. It was always on the front lines in a chaplain service and in other service and support to troops dating to the Civil War. So, if you think about this kind of as a wartime dynamic, the Y had to step up. So we shifted to focus on community response. And that's when we knitted together some partners. We had partners like United Health Group, who took their commercial kitchens that were normally serving their team members, pivoted them to make fresh meals, distributed them to the Y. We worked with Sheridan Story. We worked with Loaves and Fishes, other food shelves, some churches that stepped up, and we began to distribute food. We took some of our member services team members and started calling out to seniors. We worried about certain seniors who, for them, the Y was their entire community. It was their coffee clutch. It was their place to come and see others and to have some social interaction and to stave off some loneliness and depression. And we knew that without the Y, some of those folks would be at risk. So we started calling out to our seniors, made hundreds of thousands of outreach calls. And it was amazing, sometimes those calls would last and last because that senior just wanted somebody to talk to. We could help.
They wanted to clutch, yeah.
They wanted to clutch. Wanted
right.
to make sure they had a place for healthcare pathway. Did they have any other caring adults that were looking after them? We amped up our youth and family services to help with the homelessness challenge and evictions. We then spun up some virtual Y offerings, so YMCA 360, YMCA at Home, and those programs continue to burgeon. We're going to invest more and more in virtual and digital offerings as we go forward. But those were important elements to just stay connected and to give our families and our young people and our adult members something to do from home, not knowing how long we would be, in this environment. So it was it's a fascinating time. I think we'll have to document some of it in some way just to be able to reflect on it for the next generations of leaders within the Y. But I was really proud of the team. They were incredibly resilient. They were steadfast in saying the Y's got to be showing up in some way, shape, or form. The cost was pretty immense, to do these things with all of your revenue levers being shut down. But I think we look back and say it was the right thing to do. And the community we've helped the community withstand the early months of this thing. And now we kind of look with hope to the future that we'll be able to turn the corner in the next few months.
Oh, congratulations with all that great work and being able to go and pivot so quickly. I've seen organizations go and circle the wagons and kind of cower. And I've seen organizations that previously were very dysfunctional go and say, we can't be dysfunctional, and that was on the government side. We have to actually stand up a lot of things pronto. And be able to meet the needs of our residents. And it was amazing to be able to see how this mutation, to be really kind of specific, went and forced an evolution to say we can't have all the detritus and angst going on. We got people to take care of.
Yeah.
And it looks like you guys have, not without you haven't had that dysfunction, but to still to make that pivot away from different things, which led to a question in my head. Now, most people, I would imagine, they're not working in the centers. They're doing this remotely,
Yeah.
being able to contact seniors, being able to coordinate the delivery of food and things of that nature. How has the aspect of leading in a virtual environment, not only for you, but especially down to the site leaders, how have you noticed changes in that? And how have you and the leadership team worked to be able to address connecting mission and vision even through that, when that community, that coffee clutch of employees that
Mhm.
are there with each other all the time and can feel and build upon each other's energy really isn't there anymore?
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to measure this globally over time. What has this really meant? I think on one level, Eric, it's been exhausting. I mean, staring at a screen, really no interruption. I think about so many days where I would have maybe 12 Zoom calls with no break. You're trying to figure out, how do I sneak to the bathroom or get some food? And it's a function of, maybe us missing a little bit the idea that, yeah, we still got to, now we're not commuting, we're not driving from one meeting to the next, so we're slamming a whole lot more in. I think folks have, it's been fatiguing. There's no doubt, and I've watched our team really fight and claw through this, and I know it has not at all been easy. And for myself, I know it's taken its toll for sure. But I worried at first about productivity. I wondered if we would be challenged by productivity. But I think productivity is held. There's certainly things we're missing. Communication can break down a little easier if you're not sitting in a room together. But we're getting, I think, a little better at using these tools to make sure that communication is flowing. Um, the fuel, the juice, the energy that you get from others, I think that's a big one. That I think we've yet to really quantify or qualify. I know I know you are. We're fueled by being with other human beings and
Right.
having an influence on them and serving them, and that feels harder to connect to, through a Zoom call or a Microsoft Teams meeting, right? And so I think there's certainly been some cost to that. There's almost a hybrid notion for a lot of our executive directors. I mean, they're going in to the branch relative to and supporting some of the food distribution, so they're in some ways almost frontline essential workers, and our childcare teams. I mean, they have had uninterrupted service delivery since March 16th. We stayed open as through the a partnership with the state around essential worker childcare and
Sure.
critical worker childcare. So if you think about those team members, they've really been in harm's way in some senses, almost like that nurse or that doc that is dealing with patients all day long and running the risk of catching COVID in their own right. Thank goodness we have not had outbreaks, but still, there's that mental toll of being out there with kids with runny noses and serving the 0 to 5 year olds and serving in school age care. And then there's been, I think, an incremental level of stress in terms of just having to change so many things to be able to deliver the same service. And with our Mounds View School District or our Egan School District as an example, when they've had to go fully distanced, that changes the dynamic for families because they no longer can drop the young person off at school, at 6:30 in the morning to get themselves to work at a clinic or a hospital, and so it's not only taken a toll on the team members, but it's certainly, we know that it's taken a toll on the community. And so, but it shows a resilience, I think, in our species, if you will. Man, we can find our way, and we're still trying to find ways to support each other, even though we're so much more at a distance right now.
Are there pillars or foundations that you, as the head of the organization, are kind of saying, hey, this is what we need to do to make sure that we're continuing to strengthen the resiliency of those frontline people and even the leaders that are getting overwhelmed?
Yeah.
Some things that you found that you've wanted to change in this environment to be able to go and help mitigate some of the things that were taken away?
Yeah, we are trying to focus on self-care. I would say we're just getting started in terms of being able to deliver enough value to our team members here. So I wouldn't say we've arrived yet, but we're moving the organization from what I would call more of a swim and gym platform, certainly with camp, to an integrative care and well-being platform. So we're thinking, you mentioned spirit, mind, and body earlier, that has been the hallmark of our well-being initiatives for 100 years at the Y. And we're blending that now to include spirit, mind, body, and community, because we recognize in a large sense and also in a more intimate sense, maybe it's that number 6 or 7 members that you see every morning for a class, that community is really a very powerful element that the Y is bringing to bear. So we recognize now more and more that internally we've got to focus on community. We've got to focus
Right.
on connection. We've got to focus on advancing integrative care and well-being to our team members as much as we would externally. And there's a caretaking mentality that I think happens in nonprofits. It's much like what you might see in a nursing community, where the last person the nurse thinks about caring for is themselves. And because all day long, they're
Right.
thrust into taking care of folks who need them, quite significantly, right? And it's the same thing that I find within a nonprofit context. It might be a little different than what you might see in a for-profit context, where most of the folks that are serving at the Y are putting everybody else in the community first, and self-care is the last thing they come to, if they come to it at all. So we're actually launching a people and culture initiative here in the next couple of weeks. We're bringing in a new leader for people and culture. We're not going to frame it as an HR role. We're framing it more relative to our human beings that we're serving internally, along with the culture we want to create that can be best for them. And that will include more emphasis on self-care. How do we help you think through, creating some financial well-being for your family? How do we think about you embracing and maybe enjoying the nature-based and outdoor-based activities that we have? How can we help you become an equity leader, a certified equity leader through our Equity Innovation Center, so that each and every day and each and every year that you're serving with the Y, you're becoming more rounded, maybe more whole, and you're able to focus not only on those that you're serving, but on a healthy you as well.
And you were going on some tactical short-term aspects, and then you went and
Mhm.
blew it up into strategic long-term, recognizing that even when this COVID goes away, that the aspect of internally, that self well-being and resiliency and well-roundedness, wow, congratulations.
Mhm.
Because initially I was thinking that's what I did on a podcast a few weeks ago, excuse me, on how do leaders lead in a COVID world. And some of that was giving grace. There's
Mhm.
stuff going on at home. They may
Yeah.
be upset that, they can't hide, or taking time for, you mentioned community,
Mhm.
for the employees amongst the team, members in a team, to be able to not talk about work,
Yeah.
but say, hey, how are things going, and be kind of their own resources, or, leaders actually taking time to get on a phone call or a Zoom call and just talk
Yeah.
and make that human connection that you see at work, because that leg of personal presence is gone. But then you've taken it into a whole different realm. So I commend you on taking the opportunity to see the possibilities on how this can really bring the mission internally as much as you've been bringing it externally for 150 plus years.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Eric. I think it's interesting if even something as simple or mundane as that first Zoom call with when your dog barked in the background, or you saw a team member's child kind of climbing over them on the couch. I remember, I actually think about this in terms of how far I've come on this as well. I probably have been more formal in my head around how work should work for a long time. And I remember quick hitting the mute when my dog first barked in the background, thinking how unprofessional. And now I'm,
Right.
tilting the camera so the dog can show up on camera once in a while, right? The humanness that is showing up and our acceptance of that, I think, will be one of the great takeaways from this, especially in a work culture standpoint. That, like I know now about the little 5-year-old, just sweet kid that's climbing on one of our team members, that, hey, she is working on behalf of the community, on behalf of the Y, and she's having to be teacher of a kindergartner at the same time, right? And that's an extraordinary burden. But if we make that a problem, it'll be even a bigger burden, and her ability to arrive at some kind of well-being quotient will be very difficult. And so that is a big part of what we're trying to get at here is humbly serving, recognizing our human nature, recognizing our human needs as individuals, and trying to serve those, so that those that we're serving. And I think about hierarchy in an inverted sense. Like, my job is to serve up, not to serve down, to serve
Right.
up and to kind of get boulders out of the path for those that I serve, so that they can be freed up to serve the team and the community. And I think we're starting to get that, and our team is coming around to that for themselves. We're dropping chief out of titles. We're trying to get kind of adopted to personal power and leverage versus position power, and some of that comes with maturity. And for younger team members, title really matters, but I think it is less so in these next couple of generations, and in particular these digital native generations. I think they will consider kind of the power dynamics in work in a very different way, and we need to be prepared to embrace that.
I think you crystallized some things that were going on in my head, but I hadn't put into context. And I've said for years, the efforts by the workplace to be able to have an arm's length relationship with the employees, the inputs, and say, you're here to work. We don't care what happens at home, just leave it at home.
Yeah,
To recognizing that, yeah, we're human, but the workplace is just a different type of social dynamic
yeah,
that we can't go and just dismiss out of hand and try and keep that out of a vacuum, and then we're just a bunch of automatons that are
yeah,
supposed to do their certain work. But to bring it up the way you did, and that may stick,
hmm,
because when you recognize the humanity in the people that you're working with, and it's not an input output thing, and you shift that balance, I think that there's more intrinsic motivation that happens within everyone,
yeah,
that they're going to be connected, especially if you bring that mission and vision in, that they're really going to bring that soul of what they have into it, and be much more connected.
yeah.
um,
There's another big piece here, Eric, which I think is going to be interesting for leaders in this next generation. And Newsweek's got an interesting article on it this week, which is, in the past, taking a stand on an equity position, as an example, for a corporate leader or even a nonprofit leader, would have been considered maybe political, or would have been considered unacceptable in some way, shape, or form. And now our younger team members, in particular, um, our Y's and Z's, um, they're wanting us to be kind of on the precipice of activism, and so how do you balance that? And I think leaders are going to be called to even more authenticity. Like, you look at the murder of George Floyd, or you look at the Capitol uprising and insurrection, even using some of those words, folks might say, well, that's
oh,
politicizing,
absolutely, yeah.
uh, politicizing a situation. And yet, what our team members are calling for leaders to be is authentic, to say, hey, we really want to know, how do you feel about this, and how do you want to lead us through it? And so it's becoming, I think, we're going to see that it's going to become acceptable for leaders to take stands that 10 and 20 years ago would have been taboo. And I think that will further show that we're human, that we've got our own perspectives, that we're as imperfect as the next person, but that authenticity, I think, will go a long way with these next couple of generations that we're leading.
And you made mention earlier about measuring, having your social measurements going on and being able to see how your connectedness to mission and vision go. Do you have kind of measurements or thoughts on what you'd want to measure to say those sites or, departments or whatever that are expressing greater diversity, but
Hmm.
then actually the inclusion that we count the people, but now people count.
Yeah.
And then you get to the equity that the outcomes count. Have you gotten to a point yet where you're saying, hey, these are the type of measures that and impacts that we're looking to be able to go and see as a result of these DE&I efforts?
Yeah, great question. So we're really focused on all people thriving in our community. We have done a number of things over the last 7, 8 years. One was a Mission Impact Council that brought 50 nonprofit organizations together to try to start rowing in a singular direction around serving community more fully. Through that process, we did immersion experiences with the Somali population, with Native American, with African American, with our Liberian neighbors. And it was fascinating to kind of bring all of that data together to see that a parent wants the same things for their kids. They want a great education. They want a safe place for them to play. They want them to have some friends and some socialization. And yet there were distinct aspects that were culturally specific as well that we needed to tune into and be more culturally sensitive to. Our Equity Innovation Center downtown, which is in our headquarters building, has actually spun up since the pandemic's kind of rising up. We have spun up all sorts of distance-based learning. So we're now doing a lot of work with communities, with civic entities, with school districts, et cetera, and working on common metrics that they would want to achieve around becoming an inclusive city, an inclusive school district, an inclusive police department, whatever the case. And so those are tools now that are being built and generated that we can then leverage to other communities. We're using an IDI tool, the Intercultural Development Inventory, for a
Oh,
lot of our
sure.
groups.
Yep. Yeah, I know.
We
I'm going to get trained on that here just in a month and a half.
Okay, great. Yeah, and it's a great tool to kind of help an individual understand their measure of cultural competence as compared to their perceived
Right.
measure of cultural competence. And I can attest, there was a delta for me. I thought I was more culturally competent than I was when I
I
went
was
through.
surprised at my results too.
Right. So, and then that, gives you some kind of pathways to work. So we use that as a measure for our individual team members, our board members, and then groups that we consult with on equity. We have a social responsibility assessment that helps identify um, the areas for improvement within a corporate or a civic construct, a school district construct. And then we're doing all sorts of kind of ingoing and outgoing surveying of individuals as they're going through various curricula that we're delivering through that center. And I think it's going to give us some really interesting baseline data, but also some tools that can become more and more refined in helping. I think the Y will become a convener of sorts around the questions of equity, equality, making sure that all can thrive in a community. Hastings was a great example. They approached us and said, we really want to become a more inclusive town. How could you help us? So we facilitated a process with all the community leaders, and
Wow.
fascinating. We've done the same thing with Chaska. We've done some work with some various police departments, with school districts, and the net result is the collective awakening or cultural competence is really coming home to roost for these entities. And I think by virtue of that, our community at large will become more welcoming.
So we're coming close on our time, and I really appreciate your time. I have two questions left. And one of them is, so you came from the for-profit world. You were, an executive at Lifetime and then with a startup in the health space before coming to the Y. So your experience in being able to go and understand driving mission and vision on both a for-profit and a not-for-profit realm is strong. And I've heard a lot of things. Nonprofit, it's easier to be able to connect with mission and vision, but have the things that you've been doing with the YMCA of the North really unique, to nonprofits, or are they really applicable to the types of things that a for-profit organization would want to do in terms of structuring its leadership and culture to be mission driven?
Yeah, I think there are some commonalities. I mean, there are organizations that are truly mission driven on the for-profit side. I thought Lifetime and Red Brick were very good examples of that. These were organizations that had very clear missions, and they were clearly about moving people to a healthier way of life. In Lifetime's case, healthier way of life. In Redbrick's case, help people be healthy was the fundamental principle of that organization. So they were very mission driven. There's no doubt. I do think that there's a lot for-profit organizations to learn from nonprofits, because I think the collective humanity and the support for humanity is a bit different, right? The the shareholder in our case is the community. Is the community being strengthened? Is the community safer? Is the community better educated? Is the community honoring its elders? All of those things. Are we preventing young people from being homeless in weather like this in the middle of January in Minnesota? Those are important things. And I think the how a nonprofit thinks about its constituents and who it's serving and who the return on investment befalls or lands on, that is a fundamental difference. And I actually think there's a critical learning across to for-profits. And I think the very enlightened leaders are getting this, that they're looking well beyond their shareholder value. They're looking well beyond the stock price to recognize that they're changing the game. I think United Health Group's a very good example of this. I think the leadership there is outstanding, and they are really adopting now the values of transforming a system so that it works better for all. And that certainly they're making money doing it. That's great, but they're shifting their focus, I think, relative to the cultural ethos that they're getting after for their team. So I think I think there are really fascinating learnings on both sides. I think the performance culture and performance dynamics that you see in for-profits can infuse and support the nonprofit environment. I think the focus on who is getting the return on our efforts that the nonprofit focuses on, I think, can really be an aid to how a for-profit entity can think about their value accruing to a community.
So that leads to that second question. For those in any type of industry, whether it be for profit, profit, education, government, they want to be able to, well, let me state it this way. They see gaps in the way things are going, and they believe that aligning the mission and vision and structuring themselves that way might be better. What are some of the questions that maybe you had to ask yourself, or you wish you had asked yourself in the beginning, that they might want to go and ponder and see whether or not it's a path that they want to take?
Are you saying for someone that might want to go from for-profit to nonprofit?
No, more just in the, hey, our focus has been on
Ah,
making money for the shareholders or
yeah,
the owners to
yeah,
something of a stakeholder model, that they might
yeah,
be more fixed mindset and want
yeah,
to be more growth mindset. That
yeah,
there's an aspect of mission that they want to be able, they see ineffectiveness of maybe
yeah,
some of the things they're doing, and maybe that's brought out by COVID,
yeah,
but they feel they need to see something differently, but they don't know what questions to ask. Are
yeah.
there some things that you might be able to proffer to them
Yeah.
that might help?
Well, yeah. One of the places I would start would be with my youngest team members. What does that generation of emerging leaders care about? What do they want the company to stand for? And this won't always prove out to be a great roadmap, but I think we do as leaders need to do a better job listening. And there is a shift unfolding, right, in terms of what a 20-something, a digital native cares about versus the traditional kind of work environments that maybe you and I, Eric, have grown up through. And it's different. And I think the for-profit leader, the high growth organization leader, spending more time leaning into their young leaders to understand what they see, what they value. I think will yield a better focus on the ultimate mission that the organization can steel itself against. So I think that's one. I would put would really challenge leaders to spend more time in maybe communication pathways that are a-traditional. In the organizations I've been in, we've generally had some sort of opportunity for young people to weigh in particular at Red Brick and at the Y, and young leaders and young participants. So I think that, and I would say in large traditional companies, oftentimes a CEO won't do that. There's so many layers removed. And I
Right.
would challenge that if they do, they will have a much different perspective, not only on what they care about, but what that frontline team member is actually experiencing in their job. Kind of the undercover boss notion. What's really, really going on? And I think that can help leaders kind of reformat. The other piece I would say is there's some amazing work being done right now around the ROI on an equitable leadership team and workforce. And so I would say those organizations and industries that are more traditional, that I think they will be enlightened and surprised by the return on investment they'll get if they start to really diversify their board and their teams. That this is not a nice thing to do anymore. This is a must do. And I think about it in this context. The Y, 50 years ago served a population in Minnesota that was probably 99% white. And, offshoots from immigration from Germany and Scandinavia, et cetera, right? And we built programs for that constituency, and it made sense for that constituency. But if we had not decided that now, with some of our communities being maybe 50% or more people of color, if we had decided to just continue to build programs for a 98 or 99% white community that was homogenous and kind of had traditional or similar values, we would be half as effective now in most of those communities in actually delivering value, because we would be resonating and relevant to just half of the population. And that trend's going to continue. So that's the other place that I would have leaders really focus on. It's never too late to make some of those changes, to start to diversify their board, diversify their leadership team, get fresh perspective, get folks that push back, and have a different cultural lens or view. That's going to deliver some significant return for the organization.
On that, I think we'll close things off. Glenn, thank you so much. You helped me go and crystallize some things, as I mentioned. You are doing some marvelous work, you and especially all the team members down on the ground that are actually supporting the needs of the entire community. And you mentioned it, upside down, non-hierarchical. It really is those people, whether it's a profit or nonprofit, that make the great things happen. So congratulations on taking that, humble stance and driving it down the success there. I've really gotten a lot of our conversation. It's great to see you again. And hopefully we'll have a chance to be able to talk about this a little bit more. I'd love to be able to follow up with you as you're going through these journeys on alignment, as well as the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and be able to kind of have a over time case study and see how things progress.
I'd be delighted to do it. Eric, it's great to connect with you. I've so enjoyed our friendship over the years and really respect the work you're doing as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have yourself a great day, my friend.
Sounds good. You too.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Misadventures in Organizational Misalignment. If you want to learn more about organizational alignment, please visit our website at www.orgametrics, that's ORGAMETRICS, orgametrics.net. Until next time, may all your metrics align.